I was initially not at all excited for the Knicks and Pacers because it just seemed like it was going to be a lock for Boston and Cleveland in the Eastern Conference Finals. And I thought that was just going to be super high level basketball. But the more I think about it, the more Knicks and Pacers has some legs to it. And what is so interesting to me is that though the skill distribution for positions are very similar, in that the best player for both teams is a point guard, and then the second best player for both teams is a power forward or power forward center in the case of Carl Anthony Towns. The differences are just so dramatic. Halliburton, you get your true point guard, whatever that actually means is up for debate, but more of a playmaker than a scorer. Brunson, you get more of a scorer than a playmaker, but still can play make. And then with Towns, it's post ups and threes. Siakam, it's a lot of face up and just out physical you. Not too many threes. So there's differences like that across the board. And that makes for a very fascinating series, in my opinion, because it's not just apples to apples. There's an entire different dynamic of how the styles are going to make the fight. So, to start out with the point differential per 100 versus top 10 teams, the Knicks are at a pretty noticeable disadvantage there. It's been talked about a lot that the Knicks could not beat good teams that were better than them in the standings. Fortunately for them, the Pacers are not ahead of them in the standings, so they do stand a chance. But I mean, even still, they were beating the Celtics with Tatum, so that wasn't the case in the playoffs quite like it was in the regular season. But still, the large body of work suggests that the Knicks are in trouble in that regard because they're 12th versus top 10 point differential teams with a -5.5 point differential, whereas the Pacers are a lot more respectable. They're 7th and they have a 0 point differential. So it's, you know, very neutral. They're winning, they're losing basically the exact same margin every time. So the real difference here is that the Knicks have a slightly better offense. They're 8th, the Pacers are 10th. And the real difference, though, is the defense, which is odd because Tom Thibodeau is regarded as, a defensive coach and he plays super hard, or he makes his guys play super hard, I should say, in the regular season. So you would expect the defense to be good, but they're actually 22nd in defense per 100 versus top 10 point differential teams. The Pacers are 7th. So they're very good, very different. And looking at the way the teams get their buckets, it balances out a little bit because where the Pacers have the advantage in defense quite a bit and just, overall play against good teams, the Knicks are a more conventional playoff team in the sense that they rely less on transition points, which tend to fade come playoff time when players are actually trying to their fullest extent and getting back on defense, or at least crashing the glass hard and making it to where you can't get out and just run. So the Knicks have the edge there. They're about dead average, ranking 17th for most transition points, and the Pacers are 25th. So they are very reliant on being fast paced, transition based, and that hasn't been an issue for the Pacers yet, but it very well could be in this series because there's just going to be a real clash of styles where the Knicks, they can slow things down to a point where the Pacers aren't going to get out and run quite as much as they would like. And to start out with the player comparisons, we have, as I said, a very interesting one with Brunson and Halliburton being the best players for their respective teams. Brunson is, in my opinion, a pretty notably superior player. He is putting up 7 more points than Halliburton on basically identical efficiency, 1 percentage point worse. And, he's putting up 2 less assists and 1 more turnover. So his assist to turnover ratio, though it's great at, about 3 assists to 1 turnover, it's not insane like Halliburton's is with like a 7 assist to turnover ratio. So that is one thing Halliburton does have going for him is he's definitely, there's no disputing he's the better playmaker. But still, I think, you know, the biggest thing is offense, and the biggest thing you can do is create for yourself. Brunson's a lot better at that than Halliburton is. It's not to say that Halliburton can't create for himself, but that's not what he specializes in. To this point in the playoffs, it's played out pretty much as you would expect. Brunson's been great and efficient scoring. He's doing good with the assist to turnovers still, but Halliburton is just at a slightly higher level even in the playoffs. Halliburton's assist to turnover ratio is a lot calmer in the playoffs. It's 3.5, but Brunson's isn't even 3, so there is still a little bit of a difference. But again, give me Brunson over Halliburton. I don't think too hard about it even. So the next thing we have to look at is how each player is going to be guarded. And I like it for Brunson again because Brunson's the better scorer and he's being guarded by lesser talent. Andrew Nembhard, I think, is like a tier 2 type of defender. Definitely very good, but not somebody that I think is in the all NBA defense realm. So solid defender, but not elite. And Brunson will definitely have his way if he gets Mathurin matched up against him because Mathurin's a bad defender. So there's definitely mismatches to be had, and I think that'll happen a fair bit because Nembhard is just not the absolute shutdown type of defender that is going to stick on Brunson regardless of if he's getting screened, 20 times by Cat or Robinson, say. So, I think they can definitely have some advantages when they get Brunson in, targeting situations. Halliburton, in addition to not being quite the same level of scorer, super efficient, 67% true shooting in this past series against the Cavs, which is just absurd. He's already super efficient at 62%, so taking that up a notch is ridiculous. But I think he's going to have some real difficulties because I think they're going to put Josh Hart on him. I think just the way the bodies match up, Hart makes more sense on Halliburton because Hart's a little bit smaller. OG and Anunoby, you could argue, is the better defender over Hart. So I think they're going to be playing, a bit of each guarding Halliburton. But it's going to be, I think, Hart more so than OG because I think they're going to use OG on Pascal Siakam just because Siakam is a very physical player and OG matches up better than him or better with him than Hart or Bridges would. And obviously, you don't want Towns on Siakam, so you're not going to put Brunson on him either. So I think that just, you can deduce that OG is going to be on Pascal more. But it's not a guarantee. I think there will be some overlap between Hart and OG's defending patterns. But I think it's going to primarily be Hart. And Hart, I think, is about as good of a defender as you'll see for Halliburton. Halliburton can use his size in a lot of ways to his advantage where he can just, outmuscle you, shoot over you. He can still shoot over Hart a little bit because Hart is a little bit undersized and Halliburton's obviously a big guard. But I think for the most part, Hart is not going to get pushed around And obviously the same for OG. OG is a big boy. He's got great length. It's going to be hard to do basically anything over him. Hart and OG are about as good as you're going to get for defending a player like Halliburton. So that's great for the Knicks. But what is not going to be great is if Jalen Brunson gets switched on to Halliburton, because Halliburton will just have a field day. Brunson is a bad defender, so that could really be problematic. The advantage then, though, will just be in the team that can get the mismatches more often. If Brunson is on Halliburton more than, say, Matherin or Halliburton is on Brunson, Halliburton's not a bad defender, but he's not great. And, he's going to be a little bit tired because of all the stuff he's doing on offense. I think that's going to be like the swaying factor for the performance of the top guy for each team. And it's very interesting, though, to see the next matchup between Towns and Siakam, where, again, I give the edge pretty heavily to the Knicks. Siakam has been really good in the playoffs. I think he's leveled up quite a bit in the playoffs, and Towns, I think, has kind of fallen a bit off in the playoffs to this point. So Siakam has definitely closed the gap, but in general, I would take Towns pretty convincingly over Siakam. No shade to Siakam. It's just Towns, I think, has been like an all NBA level player this season. With that said, it is, still relevant that the playoff numbers have dipped for him and they've gone up for Siakam. So, what I like for Siakam a lot too, in particular with the playoffs, is his assist to turnover ratio is great. It's about 3, which is way better than what Towns is doing. Towns is getting more turnovers than assists regularly. So, by a pretty hefty margin, in fact. So, that's a big difference. And when it comes to defending, here I think there might be an edge for the Pacers because Miles Turner is, I think, like a tier 1 level defender. I know some people don't like him because they think he's a little bit more concerned with blocks than actually playing good defense, which is definitely not the same thing if you don't know. But I still think Turner is a darn good defender. He doesn't really get out physicaled by many players. I don't think he's going to get pushed around by Towns, and he can switch. He's very good across the board defensively. So I think he is in that like tier 1 type of discussion at the very least. If at the very least, I'd put him in as tier 2. So I think he's a great defender for Towns. And I think he's going to primarily be the defender for Towns as well. Once again, though, if they get Benedict Mathurin, they get Halliburton defending, it could be a bit problematic for the Pacers because Towns can just really move them out of the way, no issue. And there's just not a great proficiency for defense for either of them either. So, in addition to being out physical, they're not going to be technical enough to keep up either. Whereas for Spicy P, Siakam, we have, I think, like I said, OG is going to be the primary defender of him. If not, it's going to be Hart. I don't think Bridges is going to be on him too often, even though Bridges definitely has the length to contest a lot of what Siakam likes to do. He doesn't have the physical strength or weight necessary because Siakam is just a bowling ball to the rim. So I think it's going to be Anunoby, but Hart, I think, will get involved as well. And like I said, that's about as good as you're going to get for defending just about anybody, aside from like a center, say, is Anunoby and Hart. So I like that for the Knicks. I don't like, again, if they get Brunson switched on, which I do think is going to be something we see quite a bit of because Brunson is built well for a point guard. But the key thing there is he is a point guard and he's pretty small height wise. So even though he's, pretty strong, He's not anywhere near as strong as Siakam, and he's nowhere near as big either. So I think that's going to be the ultimate thing the Pacers look to do on offense, aside from just, run their regular stuff where they try to get, to an open man. I think they're going to look to get Siakam on Brunson because Brunson's not a good defender and he's small. And the thing is, the Pacers have the capabilities to get Brunson isolated quite a bit because they are more than capable of setting screens with any of their players, which is going to really make things a mess because you're still going to get times where you can involve Brunson either through the pick and roll with Halliburton or the pick and roll with Siakam. So I think he's going to be involved in basically all of the actions for the best players for the Pacers when they need it. And obviously, they're still going to run their offense, which is very sophisticated. But I think you're going to get Brunson involved basically one way or another with Halliburton or Siakam. So that's really going to put Brunson to the test. He hasn't been quite as bad in the playoffs as he is typically on defense, but he's still not a good defender by any stretch. And what is going to make things very interesting too is that the Knicks really lack defensive presence in the paint. They're 25th in defensive field goal percentage within 6 feet or less. And, that's something that can really be targeted if you get past Brunson. Towns isn't going to put up a great fight. And Robinson will, but Robinson's not going to be out there all the time. The Pacers are going to make things a lot more difficult because even if you get past the first wave of defense, they're 10th in defensive field goal percentage for 6 feet and less. So they're going to be able to contest, even if they get beat. So with that said, the final piece we're going to have to look at is with the backups, and it's very notable again the clash of styles because the Knicks are at the bare minimum. They have, one of the worst benches in the league, probably the worst bench in the playoffs, with Deuce McBride and Mitchell Robinson. Honestly, competent, solid, I would say above average even, uh, bench players in a vacuum, but the problem is it's just them. There is no hope for anyone else. So they have a big and a small that are, I think, above average coming off the bench, but that is it. And that is not great depth. Whereas the Pacers, they're only going to really run 3 guys still, but they can also rotate with multiple other players of note, but it's mainly going to be Aaron Nesmith, Obi Toppin, and TJ McConnell. Give me Nesmith over McBride and Robinson. Toppin, I'm going to say is pretty close to Robinson. They're very different players, so it's very hard to compare. And give me McBride over McConnell. So there's a little bit of back and forth, but definitely when you look at things through the lens of quality and quantity, the Pacers take the edge, no discussion. So now that we've gone through basically every facet of the game, or series rather, who am I leaning towards? And initially, I'll be honest, I was pretty heavy on the Knicks. I was like, 65% Knicks, 35% Pacers. So, like, even at my worst, I was still thinking the Pacers have a chance. But lately, I've been swinging a little bit more towards the Pacers. And ultimately, it's still up in the air for, like, the exacts of how far I'm leaning. But I am still, in fact, leaning the Knicks. I think they're just more, maybe conventional is the only thing. But I think it's a lot more reasonable to expect good things from them because they do have the star power. And though it is very nice that the Pacers are great all around, whereas, the Knicks, they're going to need Towns and Brunson to be at their best to really compete. I do have faith that they're going to be at or near their best. And especially when they get the mismatches, because there are some mismatches to be had for the Pacers. They're not an infallible defense. I understand that Brunson's going to be targeted a lot in the Pacers side as well. But even still, I think I still lean the Knicks. I would say I'm at about like maybe 58% Knicks. So it's definitely a competitive series, I think. I think this one goes, if I had to guess, I would say Knicks in 6, but I could see it being a 7-game series and either team winning from there. So the Pacers definitely stand a chance, but I am still leaning Knicks. Those are my thoughts on the Knicks versus Pacers series. Be sure to let me know what yours are in the comment section. And also be sure to like and subscribe for more basketball and football content.